Um, what is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
Oh, this isn't fair. This is one of the questions in the lab retreat. So as long as you promise not to share this with the students before the lab retreat.
Yeah.
Sure. I think one piece of advice that has stuck with me is from Randy Posh from his last lecture at CMU, where he talked about if the world is not saying no to you constantly, I don't think he said constantly there, but I added that constantly. If the world is not saying no to you constantly, then you're not asking for enough. That advice has stuck with me. There is a corollary of that advice, which I'm going to share with my students this weekend, which is the corollary of that is if you do ask for enough, then the world will constantly be saying no to you. Be careful if that's what you want. You may gain the satisfaction of knowing that you did not leave anything on the table, but it's going to be just a string of no's. So just be prepared and make sure you are making that trade-off, knowing that that's what you want.
Yeah. What is some of the best advice you've either gotten or given?
I think some of the most useful advice that I follow, I've given it, I don't know maybe where I got it. I think I've gotten it from various places, but it's that not to be intimidated by people who seem like they really know what they're talking about, or not to feel like just because someone sounds very confident that they know what they're talking about. I think that was hard to learn, like going into tech and stuff, you know, being in meetings and there'd be like these people like, you know, very strongly stating opinions and like this needs to go this way, and you know, you like I would just feel like, oh, they seem to know what they're talking about, like my ideas are wrong, you know, I won't even bring them up or whatever. But then I learned actually sometimes there seems to be like an inverse relationship where the more confident someone is, the more wrong the ideas can often be, like trying to make up for the lack of reasoning with just like strength of voice or something. Right. But yeah, so I think like it's not to be ruffled by people who sound like they know a lot people who sound like very confident in what they're talking about, if it's different than what you think.
Yeah. What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
So I think that I think I've gotten a lot of advice. A lot of it has been very interesting. I think that some of them, I don't know, it's hard to tell, but I remember a lot of episodes of advice that have been fundamental in my life. And I can start very early. Like I remember when I was I knew very early on what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be a scientist. I was 12 when I was thinking that this is what I wanted to do. Oh. And when I was 14, I was taking classes on programming, and it was a night class because it was for professionals. Everybody in the classroom was over 20. Not very young people, but looked like huge to me. No, it was a tiny kid. And in fact, it was not allowed for people that were smaller than 20, but because I had already done one class there, they allowed me to get in. And one of the students there, he told me that I had to study engineering. That I had to study engineering, and that I should, when I go to the university, if I can go to MIT, that would be great. So then that stuck in my mind. Question since then.
Yeah, yeah. What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
Well, the best advice that I hear, I mean, ever since I was a kid, I was always thinking of that, whenever you take it's a very stereotyped one, but I really like it. Whenever you take the airplane and they tell you that before taking care of someone else's oxygen mask, you have to put your own first.
Uh-huh.
And I always resonates with me that you can't take care of someone else if you're not in good shape first.
Yeah.
So, like, put your oxygen mask on. You can help someone else without passing out. So,
Yeah, yeah, makes sense.
That's every time I take an airplane, they say that. I'm like,
Yeah. What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
I don't know what advice I've surely received some advice, but I've forgotten a lot of it. Advice I've given, there's advice I give to students and junior faculty and so on, and I can repeat some of my standard ones. One is pick your problems, pick your battles. So initially there is a tendency to try to do too much. And then you do too much, and then you do too much poorly. It's better to be selective and do a few things really well. Because your scientific reputation is never made up by your paper count, but rather your few best things, right? And now, of course, the problem is you don't know what will turn out to be the best. But you won't get a chance if you do 50 random things.
Yeah.
So pick a few things which, in your best judgment, are the most promising, and go for that.
Yeah.
So that's an advice on a research for one important piece of advice for research career. Second important piece of advice for research career is have a portfolio in the of problems. Some where you know everything. It's basically just a question of execution. And to some which are slightly outside your comfort zone, to some which are fully outside your comfort zone. They have to be interesting, and you have to have some angle on them. But so you need to divide up your portfolio into problems of type A, B, and C. And then you will find over time that those problems which are slightly outside your comfort zone, they will stretch you, and then that becomes part of your comfort zone. So over time, you expand the set on which you are comfortable.
Yeah, makes sense.
And if you just focus on the things which you can do really well in the next 1 year, you will never grow, and suddenly you will find yourself feeling sterile, stuck in some place, and that you're the king of this little small hilltop, and you're isolated from everybody else.
Yeah, makes sense. What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
Let's see. I would say, well, I don't know where I got this advice, but just the general notion of embracing mistakes as learning opportunities. I think it's I mean, some people probably learn this maybe, or somewhat like appreciate the importance of it maybe earlier than I did. Because, well, for instance, I know that, like, for instance, at school, I, in my classes and whatnot, I would be very much driven to getting like the best grades possible, and in that context, like, just not, making mistakes in an exam is just seems like a strict negative. It doesn't seem like there's much to be learned from that. And I think also I was, and just the fact that a lot of our school system works through, being constantly sort of evaluated through exams and whatnot. I think that sort of maybe contributed to nurturing a sentiment like mistakes were bad and we should avoid them. Of course, you should avoid them, but if you the bigger picture is that your mistakes are sort of like an intermediate step before success. So, and that's something I've sort of more embraced and understood a bit later, in particular during grad school, where you kind of have to understand when you do research that you're going to fail like 10 times before you get to the thing that works. So as like a general advice, I think this is one that I sort of, or a lesson that I would learn and I would like very much embrace as a lesson to be followed. And maybe the other thing, just in particular from observing people like Jeff and Din and Yashra Benjo, like just seeing them making their, like in terms of career choices, really picking things that you're really passionate about. Because you would just see like they're both like more or less obsessed with what they're doing. Like it is their passion. They would not want to do anything else but this. And in particular, when you get, students asking you about what area they should invest time in and so on. And that's often kind of the first advice that I give, which is like, just find something that speaks to you for some reason that you would see yourself really spending a lot of time on, because most likely grad school would push you to spend a lot of time on that. So you will benefit a lot from being passionate about it.
Yeah. What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
Best advice I've gotten is from my mother. I was 2 or 3 months into my faculty position at McGill, my first and only faculty position. 2 and 3 months in, I was just not coping well. Like I felt there was some, you prepare as a grad student, but you're of course not ready at all for being a professor. I was just like teaching, grants, all of this. It was just overwhelming and I was feeling very overwhelmed. I don't easily get overwhelmed. And she told me, you're just gonna have to kind of figure out your own way of doing it and don't look to everyone around you and how they're doing it. And because they're doing this doesn't mean you have to do it. Like just give yourself permission to do it your own way. And her message was, I'm sure it will be more than good enough. My interpretation was, well, if it's not good enough, that's fine. I'll go find another job. And it wasn't worth doing it a way that didn't feel like the right way for me. And I might as well do it on my own terms, and either it was going to be good enough or it wasn't going to be worth it. And it was like that moment so crystallized the change of mindset. And from that day on, that has been like a mantra, just do it your own way. And that's going to be, either it's going to be good enough or you're going to go do something else, and that's okay.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I still use it to this day.
Yeah. What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
Well, here's one. This is completely unrelated to work. When you buy, this is some of the best advice, and it came from David Smith and his wife Cynthia. He's a professor at Northeastern now. He was a grad school classmate of mine. When you buy a house, budget 1% of the value of the house every year and put that money into savings. Like this, do not buy a house unless you can afford to do this, along with paying for the house. And you will use that money to pay for the repairs, the replacements, the appliances. Something will break, something will need to be painted. You need to have that money set aside every year. Best advice I ever got.
Wow. And very concrete, very actionable.
Concrete.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
Yeah. To do what you love. It's actually, I mean, you hear that all the time, but also I remember reading it in the author of the Double Helix, I forget the name. Anyway, he pointed out that it's so hard to do really good work, even if you if you just love it and it's just what you really most want to do. It's hard to do excellent work, but it's just impossible to do excellent work if someone is telling you to do something and you're not all that into it. Then there's just no way you can do excellent work. And so he was telling young scientists to follow their passion and to do what they want to do, and it's just so important everywhere.
What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
I think just like asking a lot of questions, not sort of taking things for as they appear to be, not accepting them as they appear to be, and trying to reason about things and thinking about things and just asking questions.
Yeah. What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
The best advice I've gotten is keep trying and don't give up.
What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
So the circle of control thing is one of them. I don't think I have like best advices, but like one piece of advice that I would give people is that I think that everybody has like some strength that I don't have or you don't have. Like everybody has like some way that they're better than anybody else, or it's like some strength. And so you can try to look for those strengths in people and try to learn from them without getting distracted by ways that they may not be as good as you or somebody else in a different way.
What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
The best advice I've gotten is to, believe more in myself and be confident and not be taken in by external rejections, and be more confident to say no to things. I think that's something I've only developed more recently, and after a lot of push from my close family and colleagues. So I would say that's something that people who are, especially younger people, feel like, oh, they have to do everything, they have to agree to everything, right? So otherwise they'll be at fault. So questioning, is this adding to your growth? Is this something you enjoy doing, which is really important, right? I mean, maybe not everything you do is enjoyable, but at least most of them should be. So I think that aspect is important. And the advice I give is the same, and be open to asking for help. And that can only happen if it's a healthy environment where that is appreciated. Right? You can't just tell people ask for help, and then that goes into the review or that impression that, oh, this person is not capable. So we have to create environments where people feel safe to ask for help and they receive help.
What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
One piece of good advice I got was actually from my wife. I don't know if she gave it to me or someone else, but it was often when we're struggling to make decisions, we try to ask, our friends and others, what should we do? Instead, she said it's really valuable to ask people how to do things, but not to ask them whether to do something or why you should do something. So it's, it's really good to ask experts how to get better at something, or if I were to do this, how would I do it? Because it both frees them from the burden of your decision and helps you learn something. And so you don't end up being in a place where you make some decision and then you blame your friends or mentors for making that decision. Instead, you've learned something about, if I were to do this, what's the best way to do that? If I were to do that, and then that helps you develop an informed perspective on your decision. Similarly, I think a lot of people, let's say they're in grad school, they talk to their grad school colleagues about what it'd be like to become a faculty member or go to an industrial research lab. The people they're talking to maybe don't have the context of what it'd be like, so it is not as helpful. So you should try to talk to people who actually have experience in those specific areas, again, on how to do well in those situations. So I think that's a piece of advice that I try to keep in mind, even when I'm talking to other people and when I'm requesting advice.
Yeah, makes sense. What is some of the best advice you've gotten or given?
One thing I tell people who are in sort of research-oriented careers is that I find it's much better to skim 10 papers than to read one in detail, and maybe even better to read 100 abstracts.
Oh.
Now, obviously, sometimes you need to read a paper in great depth, but I think having like a whole bunch of ideas and bouncing around in your head, which skimming a paper or reading abstract kind of starts to tickle, is a really good thing for being able to figure out how to solve a new problem, because all of a sudden you have this big constellation of different ideas that you can put together and assemble in different ways.
Yeah, interesting. What is some of the best advice you've either gotten or given?
The best advice. I don't recall where that got this advice from, but I think I think one of the advice is that just prioritize things so that you only kind of you're not defined by how many papers you publish, but on the work that the best of your work. So that probably help me to prioritize things, so to kind of not grow too large, but be able to focus on things that kind of improve the quality more. So quality versus quantity. Still, it's a bit tempting because you see because there's so many papers these days, so a lot of people have many papers, still feel a bit, okay, I'm not publishing this much. Sometimes it'll be a struggle, but you have to remind yourself keep reminding yourself that you want to do good work versus many work.
Yeah, makes sense.